It's a real pleasure today to have our next presenter. Alex is the Regional Executive Director overseeing MAD in Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee, and is the immediate past National President of Mothers Against Drunk Driving. So with that, I'll turn it over to Alex. Thank you.
So thank you all so much for having me. This is my first time attending this meeting, and I'm super grateful to be here, both to reintroduce Matt a little bit and also to introduce myself. My name is Alex Otte. I'm from Lexington. I have a little bit of a connection to all of it. My husband's a crimes against children detective in Lexington, so some of the child abuse people. His name is Zach Flowers. That's my other last name. So I am new to this position, but I've been around MAD for a really long time. You know, most of us don't come to issues like this because we want to. We come because someone made a choice that led us to this issue. And for me, it was the same way. My offender wasn't driving a car. He was driving a 17-foot bass boat at nearly 70 miles an hour on Lake Harrington in Danville, Kentucky. About 12 and a half years ago, my dad lives on Lake Harrington. I'd been on the water for years, had my boating license for years. It was truly nothing out of the ordinary. And on July 2nd of 2010, I was sitting still, basically in my dad's backyard, about 40 yards from my dad's dock, sitting on a jet ski, waiting for my mom and brother to dock our boat so that I could dock the jet ski and go up to the house for the evening. Perfectly normal day, sitting across the lake from my mom and brother. There was a 17-foot bass boat going about 70 miles an hour under a nearby bridge, which is a speed completely unheard of on almost any lake, but especially on a lake this narrow. The boat was headed towards my mom and my brother. I don't remember this, but evidently I gave my mom a thumbs up to let her know I saw him coming and I wasn't going to move. When you get your boating license, they teach you that if a boat's coming towards you, don't move or try and anticipate where they're going to go. Just stay where you are and wait for them to pass. Harrington is a very narrow lake with steep rock embankments on either side. I was very near to one side. There was nowhere to go, so I stayed still and waited for him to continue down the middle. The boat was headed towards my mom and my brother. My mom screamed. He banked to the left and never straightened up. The boat hit me from the side, going over 60 miles an hour, threw me off the jet ski. I landed face down in the water. The boat went up over the jet ski and landed on top of my body. I sustained severe, life-threatening, and lifelong injuries from head to toe, including a very severe traumatic brain injury, classified as shaken baby syndrome, where my brain shook inside my head and started bleeding in 4 places, and they couldn't make it stop. I'm sure those of you who are around child abuse are very familiar with shaken baby syndrome, but they didn't really know what was going to happen when a 13-year-old suffered the same injury. For me, it results in a lot of short-term memory loss that I make very sure you wouldn't be able to tell if I didn't tell you. I shattered my jaw, so my face is entirely metal from here to here, broke my neck, broke my collarbone, lacerated my liver, shattered both of my femurs because when I was thrown off the jet ski, I was holding on so tightly with my legs. I don't remember, but presumably because I was scared, that when I was thrown off, I took the handlebars with me. For those of you who have spent any time around a jet ski, you know it's all one piece and not supposed to come apart. They were unable to put my femurs back together, so I now have metal rods in place of bone in both my thighs. When the boat landed on top of me, the propeller landed on both of my legs. My left leg was under the water just enough that it only required stitches, but my right leg was severed by the propeller. I was airlifted to UK hospital. I was in a coma on my own for the first 4 days and medically induced for the remainder of a week. I spent many weeks in the ICU, a week in rehab, 6 weeks in a neck brace, and 3 months in a wheelchair, and to no fault of my own, this was my new life. The man who ran me over was nearly 3 times the legal limit 2.5 hours later. This would be his 4th DUI. He was charged $250, which is the minimum first-time DUI offense fine, and sent home with the opportunity to reoffend. I'm told he's done so many times. I knew then that I wanted to be the last little girl this would ever happen to, and I wasn't. And I'm not. And so that's why I do what I do, not because this was the plan or ever what I dreamed of doing with my life. I thought I was going to spend my life on the sideline of a football field. That was the dream. I did that a little bit and it was a lot of fun, but it wasn't this. And so that's why I'm here today. I worked for a nonprofit called the National Association of State Voting Law Administrators, doing federally funded research on drawing a parallel between voting under the influence and driving under the influence, and the amount of fatalities and injuries that occur in both. I was asked to come back to MAD and serve as the national president. I was the youngest national president by about 30 years, so it was a little bit of a different look for MAD, but it was a crazy last 2 years. It was a lot of fun and I enjoyed that greatly. However, when most national presidents retire from MAD, they retire. When I retired as national president, I was 26. So we joked that they had to find something to do with me. So I was brought into this position in January and glad to bring the work back home. MAD Kentucky has been around a while, but we've had a lot of transition over the last couple of years. And so I'm excited to tell you both about the programs that we're working on and the people that are doing it. But first, let's start with some of the statistics and how bad the problem really is. So there's a lot of data, and this is kind of the boring part because it's numbers. But one thing that you all know, and I will further push forward, is that numbers are important because it shows us the trends. But every single one of these numbers, whether injury or fatality, is a person with a life and plans and hopes for a future that they didn't get to live because someone made a choice. And so we talk a lot about numbers in this industry and in this work, and it's important because it is something for us to kind of identify the trends, but it's important to remember that the numbers aren't everything. And for every single number, it didn't just impact that person. I talk a lot about the fact that I was the only person injured in my crash, but that doesn't mean it didn't affect my entire family, my entire community, my entire care team, and my husband, who I didn't meet till 8 years later. It doesn't just affect that person. So I want to emphasize that while also saying that the numbers are important. In 2020, 11,654 people were killed in alcohol-related crashes. This is the highest it had been since 2008. We were really stuck on that number of 10,000 people every year are killed and 300,000 people are injured. Now it's trending more like 12,000 people a year are killed and 315,000 are injured. We know that that injury number is so far below what it actually is, but that's the data we have. 2021 NHTSA estimates indicate that 42,915 lives were lost in traffic crashes across the country. The increase of 2021 over 2020, which was 10.5%, was the highest year-over-year increase since they started collecting this data in 1975. If that doesn't scare all of us a little bit, I don't know what will, but that's not just alcohol-related crashes. That is traffic fatalities in general. From 2019 to 2020, there was a 14% increase in drunk driving fatalities, despite an 11% decrease in vehicle miles traveled. So we know that with COVID, less people were on the roads, less people were out. Everyone thought that was going to help. The problem only got worse. And we've seen that both nationally and in the state of Kentucky. From 2020 to 2021, we don't have final numbers yet, but law enforcement estimates that there was an additional 5% increase in drunk driving fatalities. So that is something that nationally, a lot of people are talking about and worried about, but specifically in Kentucky, we have a problem too. And that's something that I get asked a lot about is, Kentucky is generally lower on the list because we do have less of a condensed population than other states on the list and things like that. However, that is not to say that we don't have a problem. From 2019 to 2020, Kentucky was the 7th highest for increases in drunk driving fatalities across the country. So even though we may be lower on the list, our problem is getting so much worse in comparison with other states. Kentucky reported a 31.8% increase in drunk driving fatalities, despite a national average increase of 14.3%. We are double the national average for increases in drunk driving fatalities. And so that's something that a lot of times in the media, when I'm talking about it, they say, well, Kentucky ranks pretty low. For now, our problem's getting a lot worse than other states. The closest around us West Virginia, their increase was high 20s, and Tennessee had one of the lowest increases at 12.8%. So we're not even doing nearly as well as the states around us. Nationally, the first quarter of 2022, early estimates indicate that 9,560 people were killed in traffic crashes, not just drunk driving. Again, that's across the board. This was a 7% increase over the first quarter in 2021 and the highest first quarter at all since 2002. So we are in trouble generally with traffic fatalities, but drunk driving is still a problem. We talk a lot about drugs, a lot of programs talk a lot about drugs, and we should be addressing that, but not at the risk of forgetting the fact that drunk driving is still the leading killer on our nation's roads. It is still a problem and we haven't solved it yet. Next slide, please. So these are some things that are going on with MAD nationally that I wanted to share with all of you. So the first is MAD has made some significant efforts over the last couple of years to really broaden our partnerships. So MAD's board approved partnering with the alcohol industry in late 2020. And so that has been something that MAD nationally partnered with Anheuser-Busch. This is not something that has trickled down to state MAD though. So MAD Kentucky is not able to partner with the alcohol industry, but MAD nationally is. That's a question we get a lot because people get really excited about bourbon industry and MAD Kentucky and all those things. So it's important to indicate that we are not yet permitted to do that, but nationally they are. This has really opened a lot of doors in terms of partnerships with MLB, NFL, things like that. Really the goal here was to reach people that we never would have reached otherwise. We know that we are reaching a lot of people. We know that we've made a really big difference. Drunk driving fatalities have been reduced by more than half since MAD's founding in 1980, but we have been headed in the wrong direction for the last 7 years and drastically in the last 3. So we know that we need to reach more people, and the people who are making the decision are never going to come to MAD. We have to find a way to meet people where they're at. And so a lot of last year at the 2-minute warning of football games on Fox and CBS, there was an advertisement played by Anheuser-Busch and MAD that said, if you drink, don't drive, decide to ride. We're excited about that because it reaches more people than we would have ever reached before. You can be sitting watching a football game and you hear it. So we're excited about the opportunities that may be presented there. Coalition 45 is something that has not been created yet, but they are working on. The new national president, this is her big effort. It is all about youth. And the 45 is to represent the fact that one person is killed by a drunk driver every 45 minutes. We're now expecting that to be less than 45 minutes based on updated estimates, but that's the number we have right now. So the idea behind Coalition 45 is that it was built by Gen Z for Gen Z. And as the current national president travels the country, she's going to pick 45 teenage young adult ambassadors to kind of represent this program and to share information about MAD's underage drinking efforts. So more to come on that. That is just now something that's getting put together. This one is my baby, so I could talk for years about this one. But Memorial Day of 2022, we launched Know Before You Boat, BUI equals DUI. This was something that MAD had never talked about boating under the influence before. It wasn't that they didn't acknowledge it was a problem, just they didn't talk about it. And so in 2015, I was named MAD's Activist of the Year in DC for some work I did here in Kentucky. And there was a comment made, don't talk about the boat part, just say drunk driver. And I said, okay, well, that doesn't work for me. So that was when I was asked to be national president. I said, this is something that I'm incredibly passionate about. People are dying at higher rates than on the roadway, just less people are on the water, so people don't notice it as much. One thing about boating under the influence as well is designated driver does not work. And that's because when you're in a car, if you have a person driving who has not been drinking, if you're in the back seat, you're as drunk as you want, there's a reasonable expectation of safety. You're locked in the car driving down the road. On a boat, it's not that way. So in states that have pushed that designated driver narrative on the water, they're seeing more people die because of it. And the reason for that is passengers think, oh, just like a car, I can get as drunk as I want as long as I have someone who's not drinking driving. And that's not true. The data says that people who are drinking alcohol in the water are more likely to not wear a life jacket, more likely to swim where they shouldn't, fall overboard, etc. So the narrative of designated driver causes more people to die on the water. So that's really something that we know. So many of the things that have been translated from the roadway to the water are not and should not be translated. That is to include BAC. We know that at a 0.03 on the water, a person is as impaired as they would be at 0.08 on land. So we can't just translate the efforts that we've been doing on the roadway, even though they've worked. They're not going to work in this environment. So this was something that was really important to put together to draw attention to the fact that boating under the influence is dangerous. It is a crime. It does kill and injure people every day. And so we've seen a lot of success with not only this campaign in supporting on-water law enforcement, that has been huge, but additionally in states across the country, Tennessee really being the gold standard right now for drawing a parallel between BUI and DUI. Just last year in Tennessee, they passed a law that will make a BUI count as a subsequent offense for a DUI. So until then, you could get 4 boating under the influence charges, but you'd still be a first-time DUI offender. Even though we know, anecdotally from law enforcement, they have worked crashes for years of people who drink all day on the water, take their boat out of the water, they get in a crash, the people go one way, the truck goes another, and the boat goes another, and everyone dies. So many of these things are connected, and it's important to drive home the message that boating under the influence is driving under the influence. You just happen to be in a different mode of transportation. So this campaign is truly my baby and my life's work, and that's why I talk about it so much, but it's something that's really important for people to remember, is that it's not just about driving a car anymore. It is about people who shouldn't be driving being on a mode of transportation. One thing that I have no experience with, I am from Kentucky, but I've heard a lot about in recent months is that drunk snowmobile operation is a really deadly problem in the Northeast. I never would have known that. But when we started talking about boating under the influence, all these families kind of came out of the woodwork and said, are we going to talk about what happened to me now? And so it really has been very eye-opening. We did media events in North Carolina, Missouri, and Tennessee to launch this boating under the influence campaign. And there was a family, both in North Carolina and Missouri, who said, we lost our daughter to a drunk boating crash and no one helped me. Because until then, MAD didn't know how to serve boating under the influence victims, even though it's the same. So part of this campaign is that every state will now serve boating under the influence victims in the same way they would driving under the influence victims. If you ask me, they should have all along, but they weren't. And any state with a law enforcement recognition event had to establish a boating under the influence enforcement award. So this is something that I'm incredibly excited about and could talk about for years if you're interested. Another thing that is coming soon is MAD has a really incredible death notification training. We are known for this death notification training to law enforcement, but we didn't have anything for what do you do when the victim's not dead. Both in my experience and in experiences I hear from injured people and families of injured people all the time, is that law enforcement just don't know what to do. They have to act like robots to get through their job. We get that. I'm married to a cop. I do get that part of it. However, it's not helpful to a person who has just had their whole life wrecked when you act like a robot. It's not helpful to talk about a person who has been injured as if they're dead because you don't know how to address them. It's not helpful to talk to the family in front of them as if they're dead. And these are some things that we really see all the time, just because law enforcement has never been talked to about what happens in the middle. We have this incredible death notification program, but there really hasn't been, what do you do when the person's not dead? And so this is something we are establishing, did not finish by the end of my term, but we're continuing to work on it. We're establishing it as a complement to the death notification training, engaging with injured victims and their families immediately after a tragedy. But until we have that death notification training really built out, we do have a train the trainer in August. So we plan on putting a death notification training on in Kentucky in 2024. But really in the meantime, we're developing a resource for officers that will have MAD's information as well, and a list of what I wish you knew as an injured person. We've talked to a lot of different people to contribute to this resource, but it's really something for officers to be trained on, to have with them what I wish you knew showing up at scene, what I wish you knew coming to my house after. In my crash, I know the officer well who responded to my crash, and I didn't know till about 10 years later that he had a hard time with it because he didn't tell me. I was a kid, I was 13, but he didn't tell me, and he acted like a robot. And I'm comfortable telling him now that at 13 years old, I was pretty sure that I was the only one it sucked for. Everyone else was acting like this is just life and we have to move on. And I thought I was the only person having a hard time with it. It would have done wonders for me then if I knew that Chris King was having a hard time too. And so that's something we want to reinforce to officers. We understand that there's a level of you have to be stoic, you have to do your job, but you also have to be a human and realize that this is someone's life that is forever changed because of something that they didn't ask for and they couldn't help. And so we're really excited to get this resource out. MAD has partnered with NHTSA to put on these regional law enforcement summits across the country. And so the first one was held in Houston in December and brought around NHTSA Region 6. I always mess up the regions. Whatever one that Texas is in. That was the first one that we were doing. The second one will be in Kansas City in March. And so the idea behind it is to bring in law enforcement from the whole region. We do have scholarships available for law enforcement to come into these as well. And to be talked to by victims who remind them of why they do what they do every single day, even when it's hard, why they continue to show up when the justice system doesn't always treat drunk and drug driving like the dangerous and deadly crime that it is. They will hear from NHTSA representatives on statistics and best practices. They will hear from the IACP, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, on things that they're learning, officer mental health, all these kinds of issues. And so the first one was in December in Houston. The next one will be in March in Kansas City. And we hope to be able to launch this injury victim support resource at this next NHTSA summit. So the next one that occurs that includes Kentucky, I will be sure to send out the information to all of you, because whether or not you're in law enforcement, it is something that is very meaningful and you do learn a lot, and you'll learn a lot about what they're doing and what they're learning. Next slide, please. One thing I did forget to add on the last slide was that we are introducing a Power of Me as well. This is a national effort, but it is something that will come to the state as well. So I'll talk in just a moment about our different programs that we have in Kentucky, but one that has been recently introduced nationally is called the Power of Me. And like what Bill Bell said earlier, starting in high school is too late. These programs are super important. We have a middle school and a high school program now. They're super important, and I'll talk more about those in a minute. However, we know that by the time a person is 12, 13, whether they're drinking or not at that point, they've already made their decisions about whether or not they're going to start drinking. It's a little late. And so the earlier that we can have these conversations, age appropriate, of course, the better. The earlier we can get people to understand that there are consequences behind your actions and that you do have a choice. So the Power of Me program is being built off of a program that was around a long time ago with MAD called Protecting Me, Protecting You. And that program was an elementary school program. And the idea behind it was not necessarily to talk about them drinking, because we hope they're not in elementary school. It did bring attention to the fact that we know the earlier someone starts drinking, the more likely they are to be alcohol dependent or be a drunk driver later in life. It does touch on that. But the elementary school program is really focused on getting in a car with someone you're uncomfortable with. Anecdotally, we have seen a huge increase of kids dying while their parents are drunk drivers over the last 2 years. And so this is something that program really targets what to do if you feel uncomfortable. And not to say necessarily that your parent is your safe person, just to identify your safe person who makes you feel comfortable. And so that's the idea behind that program. Not present in Kentucky yet, is just another national effort that I wanted to mention. Sorry about that. Next slide. So some things that we're hoping to put together in Kentucky. Last year, we held the first big Walk Like Mad in Kentucky, which is very exciting. So I'll talk more about that in a minute. But first, we want to put together a law enforcement recognition event. We all know that law enforcement is a pretty thankless job, and especially in terms of how drunk driving has looked over the last several years. It's really hard to say, keep going and doing what you're doing and arresting people and taking them off the roads when it doesn't work. My husband is now a detective, but was on patrol several years ago. And he told a story one night of how he arrested a woman for DUI. She was several times over legal limit, towed her car and took her to jail. He got a call that she was walking around at Goodfellas before he came home that night. This is more common than not. And so it's hard to tell officers to continue to take these people off the road and off the water, continue to do these prosecutions, continue to work to make sure that these people can't hurt anybody when the justice system doesn't treat it like it should. This happens all the time. One night, Zach came home and said, we can't go to Goodfellas anymore. And he was on second shift at the time, so he woke me up at 2:30 in the morning, which I was very curious about. But he said, we can't go to Goodfellas anymore. And so I said, why in the world can we not go to Goodfellas? He had just pulled the bartender out from behind the wheel. He was 4 times over legal limit and had nearly hit an SUV full of people. We don't even know if he went to jail. That happens all the time. And so from our end, we're begging officers to continue to do what you're doing, continue to do what you know is right, and take people off the road and the water. And then this is what happens when they do. And so we know that it's really important to continue to talk to officers about the why. Because we know that 1 minute a drunk or drug driver spins off the road or off the water is a moment that might have saved someone's life. Even if they only spend 2 hours off the road because they get let out of jail immediately after. It's still worth it. And so a lot of states do a law enforcement recognition event. Kentucky has never had one that MAD has put on. There have been DUI awards in Kentucky previously, but never had one that MAD has put on. And so we are excited to put something together this year to recognize law enforcement. The way that it works is we will send out a nomination form to all agencies in Kentucky, and they can nominate officers based on number of arrests, things like that are very data driven. They can also nominate officers who just have a really strong affinity to the mission, whether that's preventing underage drinking, protecting victims, or drunken drug driving enforcement. So that's something we're really excited about. We hope to have that in June. We have not found a location yet, so if you happen to know somewhere that could hold me and 300 officers, I would love to talk to you. But that is something we hope to put together in June. We're really excited. We think that this is something that is needed in Kentucky and is needed from MAD. And so we're excited to put that together. Like I said, we had a Walk Like Mad formally for the first time in Kentucky last year, and it was a huge success. We made about $43,000, which for a state that didn't even plan to have a walk until about 4 months before, that was awesome. So we held it at the Kentucky State Capitol on the grounds, and we will be doing that again this year. It will be October 21st. And before anyone calls me out on this, it is UK's bye week. It is planned that way. If you're a Louisville fan, I'm sorry. But we do plan the walk because not only would I not want to go if there's a football game, but no one else would either. So it will be October 21st this year. It was October 22nd last year. It's something that we feel really strongly about. You know, our walk wasn't huge. It was about 160 people, but that's not necessarily what it's about. The Walk Like Mads are MAD's biggest fundraising event of the year, and we couldn't do what we do without funding. So that's one reason it's important. But MAD does a lot of good things, but not enough can be said about being a part of a community of people that truly get it, because no one else in our life does. So if nothing else, I want the walk to be an opportunity for people to come together and hang out in a group of people that you don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to explain your grief or what's going on. You don't have to explain why you have one leg. People just get it. And so that's really what I want the walk to be and why I'm excited to host it again this year. Planning to host it again at the Capitol. We made it fun. We had a kids corner with a bunch of yard games. We clearly had bubbles. That is my brother. He is 20 years old blowing bubbles, but that was cool. We just want it to be a fun event that everyone wants to come to. Most people who come to MAD come because we didn't have a choice. And so those who want to be a part of this, who want to show up at the walk, thank you. And all I can say is thank you to those who don't have to be there. You showing up reminds us that the rest of the world still cares. And as someone who lives every second of every day with the consequences of someone else's choice, I can't tell you how much that means. So people ask a lot what they can do for the walk. And of course, we need help setting up if that's something you're interested in. But really just show up and show people that you don't have to be impacted to care. And so that's something that I would really appreciate for you all being there, just to show up and remind everyone that you're here to be with them, give them an opportunity to not have to explain themselves, but share their story if they want to. The different things that MAD does, the first is victim services. We always say that victim services are our best kept secret, but I hope you all know that we do offer services completely free of charge to those who have been impacted by drunk and drug driving. Those can include things like emotional support, court accompaniment, help preparing a victim impact statement, help in talking to the media if that's what you have to do, things such as that. So all of those services are offered free of charge. We have had victim service specialists in Kentucky up until recently, but we do have an open position for a victim service specialist, and I have 2 very promising applicants, so we will hope to have someone in that victim services role soon. But in the meantime, I want to ensure everyone that victims have not been going without support. Either I have gone to court with them, they've been supported remotely out of Texas, or Chelsea, our current underage drinking program manager, has been supporting as well. So want to ensure everyone that no one has been going without support in this interim time, but I'm really hopeful and glad that we'll have a victim service specialist on staff soon. MAD's programs, I mentioned a little bit of this with the Power of Me. We do have a program manager right now. Her name is Chelsea Johnson, and she travels the state to give these presentations. The presentations are both MAD's Power of Youth and Power of Parents presentations. Power of Parents program is really to encourage parents to have the conversation. We know that parents do have more of an influence on their teens' decision to drink than they think they do. And so the program is all about giving parents the tools to have the conversation, start the conversation in a non-confrontational way. So that's really the goal of that program. It is brought to schools, guidance counselors, parents. We can bring it to businesses to talk to parents there as well. Really, it's targeted at parents of middle school and high schoolers, but it's important information for everyone. The program encourages that while it's never too early to start the conversation with your kids, it's never too late either. So if you have a senior in high school and you haven't talked to them about alcohol yet, there's still value in doing that. So that's really the basis behind the Power of Parents presentations. Power of Youth is our youth program geared toward middle and high school. There is a different presentation for middle school and high school to make it, of course, age appropriate. But what that program is all about is presenting the dangers of underage drinking and drug use to students, telling them about the reasons why not to drink or use drugs before 21. However, it also encourages students that they do have the power to make these choices, and the fact that it is a choice. We know that negative peer pressure is a really real thing, but positive peer pressure is too. So this program is all about encouraging students that they have the power to make the right choice. And if for any reason they haven't, they also have the power to make a plan, to have someone to call, to know what to do. And usually when I give that presentation, I end it by saying your parents would much rather have you call and say, hey, I screwed up, than to get the call that you're in jail, in the hospital, or dead, because that's the reality. And so we really ask students to know that the choices they make now affect the rest of their lives, to take responsibility for their own choices, but also take responsibility for the choices of those around them. We ask you to encourage your friends to make the right choice and to really be that positive influence. The whole program is centered around encouraging teens that they do have the power. Young people hear a lot that you're too young for XYZ. And so the whole program is around, yeah, you may be too young for whatever, but you're not too young to do the right thing here. And you're not too young to encourage those around you too as well. So that's something we were really excited about. We are so grateful to the Kentucky Office of Highway Safety for allowing us to present those programs and for giving us the funding to make those programs happen. But in addition to that is our court monitoring program. So this is something we are very excited about. Court monitoring is currently a program in 15 states. We are actively hiring the court monitoring program specialist here in Kentucky. So we are excited to get this program off the ground. But what the court monitoring program is, I apologize, talk really fast. So I need to slow down, sorry. What the court monitoring program is it sends MAD staff, in this case, in some states they have a volunteer court monitoring program, but in our case, we will have staff members sent into court completely randomly. So the idea is each week, the court monitor will receive the docket from the courts. They monitor the top 10 counties with the highest DUI rates. And those are the counties that they are responsible for. Those counties will be split 5 and 5 between the court monitors. But the idea is that every week they will get a docket of the DUI cases. They will assign those cases a random number and then enter into a randomizer all the numbers to select which cases that they're going to monitor that week. The idea behind that is we're not picking on any judges, we're not picking on any courts or prosecutors or anything else. It is entirely random what court cases we monitor and what cases we don't. The idea behind the program is that the court monitor will follow a case from arraignment to the case is closed. We do not do anything post-adjudication, so we don't monitor sentencing, but we do the arraignment through case closed to understand what people are being charged with, how it's being amended, what they actually end up with, the original charge versus the final charge, because that is something that we see a lot, is things getting amended to either a first-time DUI offense when they're not, or DUIs getting amended to reckless driving. This is stuff we see all the time. So the idea behind this program is that someone will independently and non-biasedly monitor the court cases to see how DUI is being treated. If it comes up that there are a lot of monitoring of one judge or one prosecutor, it will all be entirely random because we can show how we chose these cases and the fact that it was random. The court monitoring program specialists will each monitor 10 new cases a week. So we hope to have 40 new cases a month being monitored by each, 80 new cases a month by the program itself. But we're excited to see what this shows us about Kentucky. We know that in other states that have really put together an annual report of the data at the end of the year, sometimes it's scary to see all of the DUIs in this county are amended down, or all of the DUIs in this county aren't amended down. And that's something that I think will be very helpful, both for MAD moving forward to better support the families in those counties, but for all of us as well across the state to just know how this is working. We know how it should work, but knowing how it's going and to see some of those disparities. So we're very excited to get that program off the ground. Both court monitor positions are open and posted. So if you know anyone who would like to apply, please feel free to send them my way as well. Next slide, please. So state legislative efforts. These are some things. The first one, the bill request has already gone in. I'll talk a little bit about all of them, but first one, the bill request has already gone in. The other two, we expect the bill request to go in tomorrow. I just talked to the bill sponsor this morning. So Bentley's Law is the first one. It is based on, in Missouri, there was a grandmother who started Bentley's Law because her son, future daughter-in-law, and grandson were killed by a drunk driver. She ended up taking custody of their 6 other children. And so she talks a lot about how grandparents are not in a financial position to raise their grandchildren when something like this happens. And so the idea behind Bentley's Law legislation is that it requires drunken drug drivers who kill a parent or legal guardian to pay child support or child maintenance to whoever takes custody of the children until the child is 18. It has been hugely adopted across the country. Everyone's really excited about it. It's been introduced in many states. The first to pass it was Tennessee. And Senator Whitney Westerfield, who you all may be familiar with, he's been around for a while doing ignition interlocks and Marcy's Law. He has introduced the bill request to mirror Bentley's Law here in Kentucky. So we hope that that moves forward. We know that it's something that has served a lot of families and will continue to serve a lot of families in Tennessee. It's very important for us to understand and for everyone to understand that drunk drivers need to be held accountable. And one thing Cecilia Williams, the grandmother who started this, talks a lot about is She was in no financial position to give her grandkids the life that their parents wanted them to have. All because one man chose to drive drunk. He rear-ended them at 107 miles an hour. It was her son, his fiance, and their baby that were killed, and 6 children were left behind. And so it talks a lot about how this should never have happened and is all because of his choice, but now she can't give them the life that their parents would have wanted them to have and that she wants them to have because of financial limitations, all because of his choices. So that's the hope and the goal behind Bentley's Law, and we hope to see that move forward in Kentucky this session as well. We'll see, but keep an eye out for it for sure. It was just passed in Tennessee, was very successful in Tennessee. If you do want to look it up in Tennessee, it's called Ethan Haley's and Bentley's Law. And the reason for that is there was a police officer who was killed last year by a drunk driver, and his children were Ethan and Haley. So they wanted to represent all of those names on the bill as well. The second one is about underage DUI. And so we currently have a representative in Kentucky. His name's Chad All, and he is a representative from Lexington. But his wife and daughter were hit by a drunk driver about 10 years ago. They were uninjured, but they were hit by a 19-year-old drunk driver who immediately got a hardship license because he was a pizza delivery guy. So they immediately gave him his license back because they said he needed to be able to drive, right? We know that Kentucky's hardship license has issues anyway. You all remember the sheriff in Jessamine County who had a DUI in his cruiser, and then they gave him a hardship license because he was a cop. That's the whole thing too. That's my soapbox issue. But we have hardship license issues anyway. So that's beside the point. But Chad All really wants to focus on underage people getting a DUI. They shouldn't have been drinking anyway, but driving drunk and then essentially getting away with it because they get their license right back, whether it's for work, school, family obligations, whatever that looks like. So we are looking to mirror a law from Idaho. And that law says that if someone who is under the age of 21 gets a DUI conviction, following that zero tolerance law of 0.02, if they get a DUI conviction, they will lose their license for a period up to 1 year, but 90 days of that is non-negotiable. 90 days of that cannot be commuted. There's no judicial discretion, nothing. So that's the law we're looking to copy. You know, it's not perfect, but at least for 90 days, that person would not have a license. We know that license suspension doesn't always work. That's something Matt talks a lot about, but it's a step. It's a step in improving that law and not having the cases like he saw in his life too. The third is a hopeful improvement to the ignition interlock law. So we have passed ignition interlocks twice in Kentucky, which has been great and has added some more each time, both in 2015 and 2019, but there's still a loophole in our law. And what that is currently, if a person gets a first-time DUI offense, they can either get a 4-month ignition interlock or a 6-month license suspension. And the law allows for judicial discretion, so the judge gets to choose whether they get the 4-month interlock or the 6-month suspension. Because it's easier and no one has to worry about it or make sure they're using the interlock, make sure they get installed, whatever. More often than not, judges are choosing suspension. We know that a high percentage of people continue to drive drunk on license suspension or continue to drive in general. License suspension typically doesn't work as well as it should for drunk driving convictions. And so under our current law, there's no requirement for a person to use an interlock at all if a judge chooses license suspension. The problem with that is we're seeing overwhelming numbers of people either continuing to drive drunk on a suspended license, or even if they don't drive while their suspension is going on, driving drunk right after because they haven't learned anything. They haven't learned that you have to be unimpaired to start your car. So the amendment that we are hoping to make to the ignition interlock law is we're just amending the current law. That's what Chad All wants to do. He wanted to get rid of the suspension option entirely, which I really respect the gumption there, but I didn't think that was going to work. So his plan is to, for the first offense, it will either be 4-month interlock, 6-month suspension, but if the judge chooses 6-month suspension, the last 45 days of that, you have to use an interlock. So it's less than the time of the interlock period. So if it's cost prohibitive, that's one reason to do that. But also, a person has to learn something, has to prove that they're unimpaired to drive their car for at least that 45-day period. Moving forward, that amount of time would double. So if it was the second offense, it'd be the last 90 days, etc. So he did message me this morning and said he had another meeting with the bill writer and had to make some tweaks. I don't know what that means, so I will let you know when I figure it out. But everything was hoping to be filed tomorrow. Next slide, please. Federal legislation. So I hope some of you are familiar with this, but in 2021, MAD really spearheaded some federal legislation to get drunk driving prevention technology put as standard equipment in all new cars. No one ever thought we could do it, and we did. So it was signed into law on November 15th of 2021. This law will put drunk driving prevention technology as standard equipment in all new cars as early as model year 2027. So as early as 26, we should see cars rolling off the lot with this technology standard. We know that it's going to take a lot of time for the entire fleet to roll over. Most of us don't buy a new car as soon as new cars come out. However, the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety estimates that once this technology is in all new cars and the fleet has rolled over, it will save an estimated 9,400 lives every year and countless injuries. So when we did this work, 10,000 people a year were being killed. And so our talking point was that it would essentially eliminate drunk driving. We know that more people are being killed now. So we can't say that. But we do know it would make a huge dent in it and get us closer to ending drunk driving than we ever have been before. I know I don't have a ton of time left, so I'm happy to share more information if you are interested in what this technology is. But just a couple important things to say is that we don't know what the technology is going to be yet. Under the law, NHTSA has 3 years to look at all of the available technology and pick one or a combination to mandate in all new cars. That's up to them. MAD is entirely technology neutral. We just want to ensure that whatever they choose saves lives and prevents injuries. After that 3-year period that NHTSA has, car companies will have 2 to 3 years to make the technology standard on all new cars. So that's the first thing. A second thing is that you will not have to pay for it. So a lot of this technology is available now and is a several $1,000 upcharge as an added safety feature on new vehicles. It works, it's out there, it's just a lot of money. But once this is mandated in model year 2027, car companies won't be able to charge for it. It's like a seatbelt or an airbag. You can't charge more to have those things in your car. It will be standard equipment. Because right now, we know that it makes safety a luxury of the rich with how expensive it is. But we also know that people who genuinely are making the choice and need this technology in their car are never going to pay for it. And so that's why it's important that this becomes standard. There are 3 overarching categories of technology: driving performance monitoring, which is like lane departure warning, lane assist, automatic braking, things like that. Driver monitoring, which puts cameras either in the dash or in the rear view mirror to monitor a person's eye gaze, look for clues of HGN, whether they're looking down for too long, eyes are closed for too long, things like that. The third type is alcohol detection. An example of that is putting sensors either in the start button or in the steering wheel to measure how much alcohol is in a person's sweat. Like I said, we don't know what technology it's going to be. If I had to guess, I believe that it would be one of the monitoring systems ahead of alcohol detection. The reason I say that is because a lot of evidence has come out now that those monitoring systems can not only look to save people from alcohol impairment, but also drugs, drowsy driving, distracted driving, things like that. So now that that data has come out, we see the federal government really leaning toward the type that can save more lives than just alcohol. And we're grateful for that and appreciate that, of course. So we don't know what that's going to look like, but it is included in the law that any technology that is chosen has to be entirely passive. So it's not an ignition interlock. The drunk or otherwise impaired driver will get in their car and it either won't start, won't move, or will somehow disable the vehicle based on which technology is chosen. The sober driver will get in their car and never even know it's there. It will not change the driving experience for the unimpaired driver. We're not out to inconvenience people who aren't doing the wrong thing. We're just out to save lives and prevent injuries. And so we're incredibly grateful to the federal government. This was a huge bipartisan effort. It was really something that everyone said was not possible and we'd never do. We built our war room, which was a collection of victims and survivors who got together every Thursday night and talked about the meetings we were having. In January of 2021, this was signed into law on November 15th. So we did it. So that was huge. So we're very grateful for that and excited to see this on all new cars. Next slide, please. And so with that, thank you so much for having me. Like I said, I'm sorry I talked fast, but I had a lot to share and I wanted to leave time for questions. So thank you so much for having me. I hope to be around and attend these meetings in the future as well. Please feel free to contact me if there's anything you need from Matt or anything we could partner with you on. My email and phone number are up there. I do have some business cards if you'd like one. However, I haven't ordered new ones, so they still say National President, but they do have my updated contact information on them if you'd like that. And do you have any questions?
Yeah, appreciate, especially the part about the boating. What is the status right now of Kentucky with the BUI laws? Do we have them? Do we have any kind of thing going on with it? Is that an area in Kentucky that we need to look at as far as the legislation?
Oh yeah. So currently BUI is illegal in Kentucky. I put that in quotation marks because when my crash happened, it would have been attempted manslaughter if we had been on land. The prosecutor told us this. It would have been attempted manslaughter if we had been on land because of the extent of my injuries and the fact that I was actively dying for more than a month. But because we were on the water, it was nothing. So there's that. I will say that in 2016, I had already done work on ignition interlocks as well as the look back bill. And so I felt pretty confident in state legislation. I went down and said, I want to work on boating under the influence legislation in Kentucky. I have the backing of Kentucky Fish and Wildlife. Let's do this. And a senator at the time said boating and drinking go hand in hand. I do it all the time. And so does everyone else. This will never pass in Kentucky. So we have not pursued BUI legislation in Kentucky since then. That was a bit of a hard pill to swallow for me, but absolutely want to. And if that's something that you're interested in working with us on, please reach out. I would love to work together on.
Alex, let's just rewind a bit. What is the current status on buying a boat and not having your boater's card?
You don't have to have one.
Would there be any, is there any opportunity there for?
Yeah, so there is. So currently there's a boating safety card that you get through the National Association of State Boating Law Administrators in partnership with Kentucky Fish and Wildlife, but you only have to have that between the ages of 12 and 16. You don't have to have any kind of license or anything after you have a driver's license. Also in Kentucky, another thing that's an issue is you don't actually have to have insurance on your boat unless you have a lien on it. So the guy who ran me over didn't have insurance, shoot horses at Keeneland, that kind of thing. So we do have a lot of problems in terms of boating, but we also have Lake Cumberland. And so every time we try and bring up that conversation, people say, oh, it's a big tourism draw. So there's definitely work to be done for sure.
I have two questions. First, the bill that you talked about with the locking device versus suspended license. Could you, I guess if it's okay with you, Ashley and Steve, could you email one of them the bill number when it's assigned so then we could, those who are first interested could track it?
Yes, absolutely.
And then the other question is, this is a bit of a tangent, but I walk a lot and it terrifies me the number of little liquor bottles you see all up and down the road. I live in a rural area. I mean, they are everywhere, which goes to the question, is it okay that all gas stations sell those things right at the front counter? I mean, doesn't it seem, I know it's not okay, but it seems like that would be
That is,
kind of a quick win. Like,
yeah,
no, you can't do that.
that's an excellent question. And I don't know, that's not something I've ever thought about, but that is a really excellent question. And I will say, you know, this is horrifying, but I have learned this over the last few years is that people who want to get drunk will get drunk.
Right.
I had grown up, had season tickets to UK football, and there was a dad who would get really drunk in the parking lot and then chug Listerine bottles in the game so he could get drunker, but then the cops wouldn't smell it when he was walking out. There was a woman in Montana who chugged mint extract to get very impaired and intoxicated and then killed her son. So there are some insane ways that I never would have imagined, but that is a very good question. And I think we should talk about it.
I do think that impulse control thing. I
Yeah.
think to a certain degree, if it's right there. And I have a drinking problem, it seems like even if I don't have to walk back there, maybe one person won't grab three of those.
You're right. I do think that's something we should talk about more. Any other questions?
Mine's not a question, it's a comment.
I just want to give a quick plug for Chelsea and the education piece. I had the honor to see her present Power of Youth earlier this week, and the curriculum is fantastic. So if that's something that you have connections to schools, Chelsea and I are doing a lot of things together in the education realm. I love the Power of Youth presentations for our young people. I think they're important no matter the age, middle school, high school, it's never too late. So great job on having that resource.
Well, thank you. And absolutely, if you have connections to schools that might be interested in these programs, please let me know. As well, we do have, we only have one person doing underage programs right now, in addition to me when I can. That is a volunteer component as well. And so if that was something you felt really strongly about, we do have the ability to train volunteers on these programs so that you can provide them as well.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you so much.